Governor Lamont, I just want to make sure that everyone is aware of the main resource and data out there that the state has on our response to coronavirus is at ct.gov/coronavirus. Much of the information that we're going to talk about on this call is up on that website. And for businesses and nonprofits, there is a separate section for business resources on that web. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Governor Lamont.
David, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate you spending a little time. Let me just give you a quick update from a different point of view on where we are in our response to the COVID crisis, and then we'll get into our economic response in more detail. Usually I've been giving everybody the number of people who are infected and the number of tests and the number of hospitalizations. The really key parameter that we're looking at is hospitalization. Number of infections is obviously influenced by the number of tests and where the tests are. Hospitalization gives us a much better sense of where we are in terms of our capacity. And I think you've heard over the last few days that the good news is that the curve is beginning to bend a little bit, and that buys our hospitals time. Even those in southern Fairfield County, which obviously got hit earliest and first, still have capacity and still have vents and PPE and ICU. So we think that curve is bending, and we hope that if we continue the social distancing, that we will have the capacity we need in our hospital system. One way that we've looked at it a little differently is that our number of people hospitalized has dropped today to the lowest amount in 2 weeks. That's 46 net hospitalizations. And I'm just taking a look at the numbers as we break them down. That's one fewer person hospitalized in Fairfield County today compared to yesterday. That means in a very slight way, we are gaining a little capacity now. And obviously, the virus is spreading up through New Haven County, where it's growing the fastest, and then Hartford. Eastern and northwestern Connecticut, less hit at this point, which means they have much more capacity for social testing and make sure that we can isolate people. I can tell you that we're thinking about the day after in a couple of different ways. We'll talk about what we're trying to do with our PPP loan and with our forgivable loans that David has set up through DECD, hoping to keep small businesses intact. So as we get towards the backside of this, our companies are able to keep going again and keep their employees in place. What I'm doing on the pandemic side of this is working with a number of different companies right now that do the antibody testing. So that in addition to what we're doing with Abbott Labs, which is the 5-minute test, the 15-minute test, setting up those clinics down in Stamford and New Haven, which is where urban areas that have the most density of the disease right now. What we're doing with the blood test over a period of time is allows us to see who has been infected over the last 60 days and who has developed the antibodies. And obviously, we probably don't test more than 10-20% of the people who are actually infected to see if they have the virus. This would be a broad-based program that allows you to see what people can get back to work first. We'd probably be focusing the antibody testing on first responders, focusing on advanced manufacturing, a lot of which is in the defense or the supply chain, folks that by law we have to keep open, doing everything we can to keep those facilities safe and healthy. And I think we'll have some news about how we start rolling that out over the next 2 to 3 weeks. It's just in prototype right now. David's group that did the more short-term loans, the good news is I think he's going to be able to start getting those loans processed over the course of the next 2 weeks or so. And I think that's going to provide an important bridge to incredible help we're getting with the PPP, the Paycheck Protection. And for that, I just want to say the feds get a lot of grief for being a little slow off the draw on this, but not Marc Hayward. He's been the sense of collaboration we've had with small business has been incredibly helpful. And I'm going to go on mute now so I can hear what it looks like getting those loans out the door. Back to you, David.
Governor, thank you very much for your remarks. Before we move forward, Operator, we're getting a couple of comments that the volume is a bit low. I'm not sure if it's possible to turn that up. If so, please do so. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marc Hayward. Marc, you probably have never been as popular as you and the SBA are right now, but would love for you to talk a little bit about the PPP program, emergency loans as well, and answer a lot of the questions that I know are coming in.
Sure. Thank you very much, David. And Governor, it's always a pleasure to join you, the Lieutenant Governor, and all the commissioners in Connecticut. I'm going to try to put this in 4 different areas, and we're going to start with the PPP program and the eligibility and what people should be looking out for. And I like to always begin by talking about what qualifies as payroll costs, and I'm reading right from the interim final rule here. Payroll costs consist of compensation to employees whose principal place of residence is the United States in the form of salary, wages, commissions, or other similar compensation, cash tips or the equivalents based upon the employer's record of past tips, such as the absence of records. A good faith employer estimate would be accepted. In addition to that, the calculation would include all of wages, and then you would add payments for vacation, parental leave, family leave, medical leave, sick leave, allowance for separation, the payments for provisions of employee benefits, including group health care coverage, including insurance premiums, retirement, state and local taxes on compensation of the employees. And, another important area that's not talked about enough is, and for independent contractors and sole proprietors, wages, commissions, income, or net earnings from self-employment or similar forms of compensation. In addition to that, I got some questions today as to, the split should be 75-25, but before I go into that, I want to give an example. If your company has a payroll of $1.2 million, you divide it by 12, that's $100,000 a month, and then you take that $100,000 and you multiply it by 2 times 2.5, and that should be $250,000. That $250,000 should be used to bring back your employees onto your payroll, to pay your employees, and that would be the 0.5, which is the $50,000, would be to pay for your ongoing expenses of the business itself. And those ongoing expenses can include rent, mortgage interest, not mortgage principal, but mortgage interest, utility payments, other payments. There are a lot of other things that can be included in the regular, ordinary expenses of the business. Now, I've also had a lot of today has been my day with a number of small businesses that are asking, okay, can I spend up to 100% of what I'm getting under the PPP program to bring my employees back? And the short answer to that is yes. You have to spend a minimum of 75% of that particular loan on your employees, but in some individuals have opted to actually spend all of it and to incentivize their people to come back. Remember, the small and I know it's a unusual concept to talk to small businesses and tell them to bring their people back onto their payroll, and they're still not going to work. We understand that. I talked to a restaurateur earlier today that said to me, I have great people, and I want to incentivize them to come back on my payroll because I don't want my competition to steal my chefs. And I thought that was a very interesting way to think about. He was going to give up his 25% so that he could provide that to their employees so that they would bring them back on board. So, and that's a critical element from the business perspective, because it's an unusual circumstance to be bringing people back on a payroll when the business is technically not operating. A couple of the questions that I was asked to address, one is money out the door. I can tell you that a substantial number of loans have actually been approved in the state of Connecticut for hundreds of millions. I don't have the exact number yet, because I'm preferring to stay out of the E-Trans system to allow our lenders in Connecticut to continue to fund loans. And when I go in there, I'm knocking somebody else out. I don't want to do that. but I can tell you that the lenders across the state of Connecticut, from community lenders to credit unions to medium-sized banks to larger banks, everybody is in there, and they are inputting information into the system, and they continue to build that pile that eventually will be closed. So a number of people said, well, how long will it take? On yesterday's Treasury website, on the FAQs, the frequently asked questions, it gave the lenders the authority to go forward and to use their own note to close the loans, and up to 10 days post the approval of that particular loan to actually close and disperse. So I think there is a tremendous amount of progress that have been made. On the issue of sole proprietors, I think I addressed that in reading page 10 of the interim final rule, where it clearly says that 1099s and sole proprietors can file on their own a request for a PPP loan. We get new guidance each and every day, but I think the guidance has been extremely lenient, and we are trying to get as many small businesses into the queue as we possibly can. On the other side of that, a number of people have asked me about the economic injury disaster loan, and I have to commend the governor because you were the third state in the country that actually was approved for the disaster declaration for economic injury. The economic injury disaster loan is a little bit different because what it looks at is outgoing 8 to 12 months from a working capital standpoint as to what the actual economic injury is to that particular business. And the question is, can people apply for both? The answer is yes. You cannot utilize the funds for the same purposes. So where you're using the funds for paycheck protection, that's basically for your wages. On the other side, the economic injury disaster loans have to be used more or less for working capital moving out beyond that 8-week period. David, I could go on forever, as you know, but I'd like to stop there and allow others to talk as well, and hopefully there'll be questions that I can answer.
Mark, thank you so much. Yeah, no, that my guess is there's going to be a significant amount of questions, and for those that have been following the news, there is a chance that the Paycheck Protection Program will be increased in size to $250 billion. So we could talk more about that, but just one comment from me before I pass it off to Commissioner Perez. The Paycheck Protection Program, and I realize we're not yet a full week in, and there's a lot of questions, but this is, in my opinion, the most important program for small business in Connecticut, where you can pay your employees and manage your payroll in this very, very difficult time. So we'll talk more about it in the Q&A. Very important program. We really would encourage anyone who hasn't applied to go out and apply as soon as possible, and we're hopeful that there will be an upsize of this very important program. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner George Perez, who oversees banking, and talk a little bit about some of the agreements he's reached with banks and other initiatives that he's working on to make it easier for businesses and individuals in the state of Connecticut. George?
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. If you hear thunder, it's because there's a big storm outside my window, so it's not that anything else bad is happening. I want to talk about two particular initiatives that we started with the direction of the governor. One has to do with residential mortgages, and it gets complicated because to most people, a mortgage is a mortgage, right? They don't understand the difference between a conventional mortgage and a government-backed mortgage, or a portfolio mortgage, or a non-portfolio mortgage. But basically, the relief you're going to receive is similar, but the rules are a little different depending if you have a federally backed mortgage. And that could be an FHA, a BA, a Fannie, or a Freddie. And even within the federal government, for a period of about 2 weeks, the rules were different. But as of today, basically people could get up to 180 days, which is 6 months, of deferment. And at the end of that, there will be an analysis done. And if there's a need for most 90% of the federal mortgages, there will be a second 180 days. The 10% that's not there yet, I have a feeling in the next couple of days, they will catch up with everybody else, and the rules will be the same. There's been some confusion about that because one of the things that has been taught to people is at the end of the 60 days, 90, 100, whatever the days is, payment is due. Well, technically that's right, but it's not the way that it's been described to people. And we're going to go back and try to instruct people for federally insured mortgages and none. that even though payment is due, that does not mean that the consumer has to pay the whole 90 days or 180 days at once. It means we have to come out with a way of how that money is going to be paid back. And one of the options can be a mortgage modification that adds that money at the tail end of the mortgage. So there's been a lot of confusions about that. The second initiative that we have worked on is what I call the Small Business / Commercial Mortgage Initiative. We have a list of banks that have signed up, committed to the following things that I'm about to say. And there's a very small group of banks that have not, and I expect them all to eventually be part of that group. If you're a small business customer, or if you have a commercial mortgage, you should contact your bank. All the banks have agreed to work with people who were impacted by COVID-19, who were not in distress, meaning that they were already a turbo loan prior to COVID-19. And they will work with you, and it will include forbearance, meaning you don't have to make a payment for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. It depends. If you're a restaurant and we keep you shut down for the next 90 days, obviously you don't have a means to pay. If you're not a business that is working, your cash flow has been impacted, but not at the same level, the solution will be different. And as with the residential mortgages, once we get a better feel when things are going to go back to quote-unquote normal, they'll figure out a way how that money would then be repaid back. So that's taken something that took a lot of effort and still has a lot of work to be done, and try to condense it to a couple minutes so we can leave room for questions.
George, thanks very much. Yeah, we can get into much more of that in the question period, but George works very, very closely with all Connecticut banks as well as the federally regulated banks and our credit unions in making sure that we're all working together in this period. So more to come in Q&A on that one.
And I agree with that. I want to say thank you, because even the federal charter banks who do not have to work with us have stepped up and have been very cooperative.
Absolutely. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Andy Mays, who runs the Department of Insurance. Andy?
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for the chance to be here. Thank you to the Governor, the Lieutenant Governor for their leadership, and to my fellow commissioners. This is a difficult time for us all, and I think we're all working overtime to make sure that we get through not just the crisis, but as the Governor said, the day after. And this is an issue, I think, that is bigger than just the state, which is why I'm actually going to start with the IRS. There's one thing I found as I've spoken to people is that not many small business owners are aware that the IRS is offering some help during this difficult time. If you go to our website, by the way, ct.gov/CID for Connecticut Insurance Department, it will tell you, you will see a whole website devoted to coronavirus, which will give you an awful lot of the information that I'm sharing with you today. When it comes to the IRS, if you've got a small to medium-sized business, I just want to make sure everyone knows there are some refundable payroll tax credits that will immediately and fully reimburse you if you've got somebody who's out sick because of coronavirus. That IRS will cover up to 80 hours of paid sick leave. The employers receive 100% reimbursement. Health insurance costs are also covered, which is what I'd like you to know. And there's no payroll tax liability. And if you're self-employed, you receive an equivalent credit. In addition, by the way, you can also get an additional tax credit based on the cost to maintain health insurance coverage for an eligible employee during a child care leave period. So if a child care provider is unavailable due to coronavirus, the IRS will credit you up to 2/3 of the employee's regular pay, and that's capped at $200 a day, up to $10,000 in the aggregate, and up to 10 weeks of qualifying leave can be counted towards a child care credit. Now, in the state, as you've probably seen, under the governor's direction, we've done an awful lot to try to make sure nobody loses insurance. Insurance provides the security that we need now more than ever. One of the first things we did was speak to our health insurance friends to try to make sure that there would be no cost to go in to get tested, and that people would not have to worry about the cost if they were concerned that they may or may not have coronavirus. Then we moved towards extending a grace period. So if you've been affected by COVID-19, you are not going to have to worry about losing your insurance coverage while you're sitting there trying to recover, or while the business is trying to recover. recently, and this was on April 1st, so last Wednesday, the governor issued an executive order which mandated that 60-day grace period for premium payments. So for 60 days, nobody can get canceled for non-payment, and that can give you the reprieve that you need during this difficult time. The good news is this does not apply just to health insurance. It applies to any insurance regulated by the Connecticut Insurance Department. If you have a concern, if you have an issue, what you need to do is call your agent or broker, or if you go direct, call the insurance company. Just tell them that you have a COVID-related issue. And if you get any pushback, call the insurance department. Our number is 860-297-3900, and we've got people there waiting to work for you. On April 5th, so that was just last Saturday, the governor also issued another executive order, and that's designed to reduce the cost of care for people who are uninsured. So if, unfortunately, you don't have insurance, you will know that you are not going to get some incredible cost, some incredible bill coming down the road. And if you go to the governor's website, you can see that executive order will help you. But I have to tell you, there is no reason right now not to have insurance if you can afford to pay for it. You will not lose insurance if you already have it. But if you had chosen not to get health insurance, please go to Access Health Connecticut. Access Health is offering a special open enrollment period. So it's just like the regular open enrollment. You don't have to say what you were doing before, but until April 17th, you're going to be able to get very good health insurance through Access Health. And the last thing I want to mention is that on April 6th, which was this past Monday, I called on insurers operating the state to reduce auto premiums to reflect the fact, as we all know, that there are fewer people driving on the road. So while we're all at home sheltering in place, the risk is reduced. And I'm happy to say that it's only been a couple of days, but a number of insurers have already done this. I think yesterday or the day before, for instance, Travelers announced that they will do that, as well as allowing people who may be working for a restaurant, may not have had commercial coverage to deliver food. Restaurants are going to be able to use those people now. Or you can use your own car if you own a restaurant, and they will consider that coverage incidental, not require you to get commercial coverage, another way to help small businesses. So we have I think the Hartford is going to announce this, and I know there are a number of insurance companies that are working on this, and we'll be able to announce it soon. There are a number of ways that we can make sure you get or keep insurance. Please take advantage of them. Back to you, David.
Andy, that was great and super informative. Really appreciate all the work that you guys have done on behalf of our businesses and residents here in Connecticut. Next up, I'm going to turn it over to my partner at Economic and Community Development, Glenn Thames. Glenn?
Thank you, David. First and foremost, I just want to give a huge shout out to Marc Hayward and just thank you for the ongoing partnership that DECD and SBA have. I want to ensure all of our businesses on this call and the broader community that the state, through Economic and Community Development and the Small Business Administration, that we are in close partnership, working hand in glove to ensure that we have a Connecticut coordinated strategy to ensure that our small businesses have access to the $350 billion of funds dedicated to small businesses. So I just want to reiterate that point and thank Marc for the ongoing partnership. That said, we know that in order for our economy to rebound as quickly as possible and get to the next day after this pandemic, is that we need to get capital to our companies as quickly as possible. And so one of the two things DEC did immediately to help our small businesses with short-term capital was we launched a Connecticut Recovery Bridge Loan Program 2 weeks ago, on March 25th exactly. And within the first 36 hours, we had over 4,000 applications. And today we have over 5,000 applications. So we quickly had to close off the spigot for the moment because, again, we were oversubscribed given we had started with $25 million that we dedicated to this and have since increased that to $50 million. And so we've had to rethink our process to ensure that we can efficiently, quickly, and responsibly get this money out to small businesses, if you will. And so we're in the process of evaluating our currently heavy manual infrastructure, if you will, because, again, DECD is not a bank. And so we've had to reevaluate and pivot our strategy. And so we're very close to partnering with a fintech-enabled lender that we are hoping to partner with. So more on that to come, but we will be communicating the next phase of the application process to the over 5,000 applicants in our pool early next week. So more on that to come. And again, our goal is to quickly and efficiently get this money out to those who have applied to date before the end of the month. Next, the governor announced yesterday that in partnership with HEDCO, which is a community economic financial institution that runs the Minority Business Initiative for the state, we partnered with them for a new line of credit product that is specifically targeted to women and minority-owned businesses with less than 20 employees. So these are for our smaller businesses, more of our mom-and-pop Main Street businesses that are experiencing significant cash flow needs due to mandated shutdowns and closures, if you will. And so this product was really designed to help those companies in need provide some much-needed cash flow so they can sustain their business operations through this pandemic. And a part of those expenses will be forgiven as part of a feature of that product, if you will. So, again, with that, those are the two main updates in our focus at DECD that I wanted to provide you with and where we're at now. More to come because, again, we've looked at this process in 3 phases, kind of immediate action, short term, how do we slow the bleeding, if you will, and to ensure that businesses can survive, and then really looking at beyond this pandemic and the long-term recovery that's going to be required. So more on that to come, and I know the governor and legislative leadership are on ongoing conversations relative to more relief that will be required and will be needed in the future, if you will. But that's what we're up to now. This is our priority, to get this money out to our small businesses by the end of the month for the Connecticut Recovery Bridge Loan. And folks that are interested in the HEDCO that fall into those categories, you can reach it through our site or the HEDCO site and through our main coronavirus state site that David mentioned earlier. In addition, if there's any further questions that people have, I just want to reiterate that we have a team of dedicated resources and team members at DECD that are manning our hotline, a part of our COVID-19 emergency response unit. And that number is 860-500-2333, 860-500-2333. I know we'll try to get to as many questions as possible, but I encourage businesses, if you have follow-up questions, want to understand how to navigate all of this information that is coming before you, because I know it can be hard to navigate and it can be hard to absorb given all of the substantive content in real time that's coming. These individuals are there to help you navigate that. So thank you. Want to get into the questions.
Great, Glenn. Thank you very much. With that, I wanted to introduce Lieutenant Governor Susan Bysowitz, who has joined the call as well, to make a few comments before we do the Q&A. Lieutenant Governor?
Yes, Commissioner, thank you so much, David Lehman. You have been doing Herculean work along with Gwendolyn Thames to help our small businesses, and the governor and I are very, very grateful. And Marc Hayward from the SBA, thank you so much for everything that you're doing. The governor and I hosted conversations with I think 4 of our 5 Congress people, and you've been fabulous to help us with the ins and outs of the federal programs. I actually have a couple of questions that I know I've gotten from a huge number of my constituents. And so the first question is going to be for Marc. Marc, I've had this from dozens of constituents. They applied for the PPE program, the PPE Paycheck Protection Program. They got a case number. Then they got a notification that their documentation was lost. And so they want to know what they can do about that. What does that mean? What do they have to do? I have a question for Gwendolyn Thames. Gwendolyn, are veterans included in the HEDCO program that you mentioned, along with women-owned and minority-owned businesses? And I want to point out also that to any of the businesses who are listening who already have a Small Business Express program, if you're part of a Small Business Express loan, that the state has some forgiveness, or you can put payments off due to COVID, so know that that is a possibility. And also, and there's guidance, by the way, on the state website. And I have a question for Andy Mays. Andy Mays, our insurance commissioner, we know that there's been a drastic reduction in driving, and I've read that some states are considering asking insurance companies to reduce their rates auto insurance rates, because people are hardly using their cars or using them much less. So those are my questions from our constituents in Connecticut.
Great. Thanks, Lieutenant Governor. So let's go around the horn here. Marc, off to you first.
I pride myself in trying to stay out in front of things, and Lieutenant Governor I'm so pleased that I made a couple of phone calls this morning after I received an email. Essentially, I think you're talking about one lender, and in discussions with that lender, they had a glitch in their system when they went to batch. They didn't lose the individuals' names that applied, and yes, they do have a number, but there was either an inability to upload documents, or there were documents that didn't upload properly. So I was told this morning that an email would go out to a significant number of individuals in the state of Connecticut who was using that platform. They were going to be asked to go back in through the email that they were being sent and to re-upload those documents. So I am aware of that. They're not out of the system. They're still there.
Can you tell me what lender that is, please?
Do I have to?
We can talk offline, but I don't think that the constituents that I've heard have been giving me different banks. And also, I've talked to people who use the Middlesex Chamber of Commerce personnel to help them fill out applications. And so I know they've used different banks. It's not just one bank, it's some smaller banks, and that's why I was concerned, because I know that it's different banks.
Yeah, I'll be happy to talk to you offline on that, but I do know that there was a major bank that, because what they're doing is they're collecting the information and through a batch system, batching it up to SBA's E-Trans system. So I'll be happy to talk to you about that, and whatever we can resolve, we certainly will do.
Great. Marc, thank you very much. Glenn, do you want to take the LG's question as it relates to other loan programs at DECD?
Yeah, sure. So I think your question was relative to our veterans eligible for the new HEDCO line of credit product. And the source of funding for the HEDCO line of credit program is through Public Act 16-128. And that essentially stood up a minority business revolving loan fund. And under that act, and under that fund, minority refers to ethnic and racial groups and women. It does not include veterans. However, with the Connecticut Recovery Bridge Program, we have had veterans who applied to that because that was a part of one of the questions that we asked on our initial application, were you woman-owned, minority-owned, or veteran-owned? So we have a good sense of how many veterans are in that current application pool of 5,000. And so a part of, our criteria for evaluating is ensuring that we have equitable distribution of these funds amongst of targeted groups.
Glenn, thank you. And can you just speak to what opportunities there are to put off payments for any businesses who may have existing small business express programs? Because I know you folks have done something on that, and I think it's important for businesses to understand what the relief is.
Absolutely. So, again, one of the immediate actions that we took was essentially doing a 3-month payment deferment, so a 3-month holiday, if you will, through this COVID pandemic. So that's April, May, June for our entire Small Business Express portfolio. So I think as many people know, DECD has been providing direct loans since about 2011 through that Small Business Express program. We have over 800 active portfolio loans that are in that. And so we extended that 3 months across the board. If companies have any other loans with DECD that were outside of the Small Business Express program, we are absolutely flexible and accommodating those where required relative to hardship.
Great, Glenn, thanks so much. And Andy, do you want to touch on the auto insurance a bit more for the LTD?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for the question, Lieutenant Governor. As I mentioned earlier this week, we issued a notice to insurers to ask them to lower the personal auto premiums to reflect the lowered amount of driving that people are doing during this shelter-at-home, shelter-in-place period. And they haven't had much time to comply, frankly. It's 3 weeks or 3 days to share things. But I am pleased to note that they are either, the insurance companies I've spoken to are either doing it, in the process of doing it, or have already done it. Just outside our offices in Hartford, for instance, Travelers announced a day or two ago that they were doing it, and that they were also going to allow people to use their personal autos in the business. So you want to make a restaurant delivery, for instance, you'd be able to do that under your personal policy and not need to get special commercial coverage. That's what we're asking for today, and I don't think they've announced it yet, so pardon me for jumping the gun, but I know the Hartford is coming out to announce it. And I know there are a whole bunch of other companies that have done that: Allstate, Geico, Liberty Mutual, Safeco, American Family, USAA. As of this morning when I checked, 9 of the top 10 insurers had already put their program in place. And if I can just go a little bit longer, David, because I had a question from somebody who asked, are there eligibility requirements to get the auto insurance lowered? How does it work? No, you don't have to do anything. These companies will do it automatically, and you should get a premium credit. Some companies may give you, there are a couple of companies that are doing it by forwarding a check, but most companies will provide a premium credit, and most companies are looking, at least for now, at April and May, and we'll see where things go. If you have a question about your particular company, as I mentioned, please call the insurance department, 860-297-3900. We're here to help. Thank you, David. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor.
No, thank you so much. I just wanted people to know that was out there.
Great. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Thank you, Andy. So with that, we have about 10 or 15 minutes for questions. So Maribel Laluz, will you take it from here?
Sure. And I just want to remind everyone that this call, the recording of this call will be distributed afterwards for those who can't join. I'm going to try to synthesize a question here because I've gotten this over and over. This is about sole proprietors and those who are self-employed. There's sort of lots of questions and confusion around this. they're aware that there's state programs, there's federal programs, and then there's unemployment. But if they are a sole proprietor, should they apply for unemployment? Should they apply for PPP? Should they go to the state DECD program, and does getting one set of funding cancel out the other? Can you sort of like walk them through where they should go or make a recommendation?
Sure, it's David. Marc, do you want to start as it relates to the federal programs? I know you touched that the loan proceeds can't be the same, but maybe a bit more in terms of how a sole proprietor, when they can apply and how they should think about it.
Yeah, I mean they can apply now. They're eligible right now. In fact, I was just responding to somebody who asked that question, and it's on numerous pages through the interim final rule. But on page 5, it's very clear that page 6, it's very clear that sole proprietors are eligible for the PPP program, and it talks about other forms of compensation. There is a discussion as to how do you calculate that, and if you notice in all of the documentation that's provided to the lender, it's self-certification and documentation coming from the sole prop of the 1099, and on the other side, on the side of forgiveness. Again, it's a reliance because of the safe harbor provisions and the whole harmless that those individuals are providing under penalty of perjury accurate information to the lender.
Great. And Glenn, do you want to touch a bit on the DECD and the state level programs, how we're thinking about sole proprietorships?
Yeah, sure. So sole proprietors are eligible as part of our initial kind of qualifiers for eligibility were that you were registered with the state of Connecticut and had 100 or less employees. And so they are eligible. And again, I would encourage people to apply for all the programs. So to the extent that you've applied for a Connecticut Recovery Bridge program, please apply to the SBA because we designed our product in a way that in the event that you were applying for a disaster loan and got those dollars, that you could then essentially use those SBA funds to take out our loan, which was meant to be a short-term loan product. So again, separate and apply for all the available capital that's out there at this point is my best suggestion.
Sure, and Maribel, it's David. I'll take the last part of that question. Commissioner Westby is not on this call, but the Connecticut Department of Labor is working feverishly to set up a program for the pandemic unemployment assistance, which is the federal program that is affording sole proprietors and self-employed folks to get unemployment benefits. So more to come on that, but they are working as fast as they can to work through their backlog and set up these new programs that are coming out as to respond to the crisis.
Okay, great. And the next one is about restaurants and lodging. Can they assume that the closure and the guidelines for restaurants and bars will extend past April 30th?
It's David. I'll take this one. At this point in time, there's not been a determination on that. Obviously, we're talking on a regular basis, looking at the data from a public health perspective and taking decisions on those types of businesses as well as schools and others on the social distancing front. So at this point in time, it's too early to tell, but we're monitoring it, and as soon as we have new information on that front, we will communicate it.
Okay. Getting another question here, several questions on commercial landlords. Is there any assistance available to landlords specifically, since a lot of their tenants are having a hard time paying rent?
Marc, do you want to start there from the federal perspective, and then we'll go to the state perspective?
It would only occur, David, if it depends on it depends on the corporation, whether or not it was a sole proprietor or LLC. Then the eligibility, but it's not for lost revenue. We had a number of discussions about this, and this is a very sticky area. So I don't want to opine on something that I'm not really sure about. So I'm going to pass right now and say that I'll look it up and I'll get back to you.
Okay. Sure. So there's two things I'd mention from the state side that I think are worth going into. One, and I'll pass it over to Commissioner Perez here in a second, but the mortgage deal that was both residential and commercial that George negotiated with our banks and credit unions, that does afford a grace period most likely, but it does come down to the specific lender and the specific circumstance. The other thing I just would call folks' attention to is there was property tax relief that the governor and the lieutenant governor put in an executive order last week, where there are two plans that municipalities have the ability to offer to their property taxpayers, and commercial landlords can benefit from that as well. There is a requirement that they pass some of that benefit through to their tenants, but those are the two main things from the state perspective that can provide relief to those landlords. So, George, do you want to talk about how a commercial landlord should think more about the deal you brokered with banks and credit unions?
Yes. What the commercial borrower should do is contact the credit union, which only few does commercial mortgages, excuse me, or the bank, and they will work with them. Obviously, if a borrower has a restaurant as a tenant and the restaurant was shut down, that's going to impact their cash flow. So the banks understand that, and the credit unions understand that, and they're willing to work with those borrowers on a case by case. They're not going to do something across the board because they don't know all the situations. And if you have a problem with it, like Andy says, as stated before, you can also call the Department of Banking, and we will assist you in any way we can. And our number is 860-240-8170. Again, 860-240-8170.
Great. Thank you, George. Maribel, next question.
Okay. Let's see if we can take this one. Again, just the sole proprietors. There's sole proprietors that have a personal checking account with their bank. They may not have a W-2 or profit and loss. Do they still qualify as a business? Is there any other eligibility documents that they can provide to qualify for the PPP?
Mark?
Hey, Dave, I that faded in and out, so I only heard the very end of that question. Can you repeat it, please? I'm sorry.
That's fine. They're sole proprietors, right? And they have personal checking accounts with their banks. They may not have W-2s, or they don't have necessarily a profit and loss statement, right? But they're an LLC or a sole proprietor. What kind of documents can they provide for eligibility?
So I'm assuming that they had to file some kind of tax return if they took a draw, or if they're in some way of taking income. And if that's the case, then they would use that as their evidence as they did the calculation.
Okay. I have a question on business interruption insurance. Businesses are being told that interruptions that are COVID-related shutdowns are not covered. Is there any plan to address this by the state?
Yeah, so before Andy jumps on this one, Andy, why don't you, I know you've answered this many times, but also, as you do, could you talk a little bit about how you, after this crisis, how you think the insurance industry and the federal government potentially are going to adopt a pandemic insurance type policy?
Thanks, David. Yes, I will. I think what we need to recognize, as I said earlier on, is that this goes beyond the ability of the state, frankly, of the insurance industry to manage. And business interruption insurance is a perfect example of this. What we need is a federal response to the issue, because the losses are simply too great for any industry to cover at this point. It's too much for the small businesses to cover. It's too much for the insurance industry to cover at this point. Now, business interruption is an insurance policy that was designed to cover physical damage to a business, or in some cases, damage to the supply chain. Since the SARS epidemic, pretty much every business insurance coverage policy has excluded communicable diseases like viruses. And it will be, there are a number of lawsuits that are out there. We'll see what happens. So it'll be interesting to see what the courts decide. But the courts have held, generally, that these are not covered. What happened in Congress is that some people in Congress proposed a bill that was modeled on TRIA. TRIA is a Terrorism Risk Insurance Act. This would be the Pandemic Risk Insurance Act. And what this would recognize is that only the federal government has the resources to provide the backstop for this insurance. If the insurance industry is required to cover it, what is going to happen is that pretty soon insurance will either not be available or affordable for business interruption. And that's where we are right now. I, as a husband of a small business owner, would reach out to Congress and say, well, let's do a job on this. This is one of those things that we do need to be able to provide to businesses so they have certainty. Thanks, David.
No, that's right. And I think that one of the lessons here is this type of insurance is absolutely needed, but similar to terrorism insurance, I think the federal government is going to need to play a significant role, as evidenced by the response so far. Maribel, I think we have time for one more question, and then we're going to turn it over to Governor Lamont to make a few closing comments.
Okay. So just the last question here is, can you give us a hint as to where you're going next in the business area? Are there any more moves planned on defining what's an essential business, any more workplace rules, or any other assistance program that we should expect down the road?
It's David. I'll jump on this one. So we're communicating to the community and to businesses and to all residents of the state as soon as we can, whether it's through executive order or guidelines or various rules. So there's nothing that's imminent that you haven't seen, because as soon as we decide to do it, we're putting it out and implementing it. So that's happening real time, and certainly we're watching the data and the evolving crisis and how to best respond to it. So we want to keep the lines of communication open, and we want to make sure we're over-communicating with the public at the government level. So hopefully there'll be more to come on that as we have it. In terms of initiatives and other programs, as Glenn mentioned, there were really three levels of response from the state's perspective. What needs to be done immediately, what needs to be done in terms of safety net and in conjunction with the federal government and the very significant response there. And then the third prong is going to be the recovery prong. And the governor mentioned at the outset, we're starting to have conversations about that exit plan. What does that look like? How do we restart the economy? So we are starting to spend real time on that, and our hope is that we get to spend more time on that. And how do we re-stimulate the economy to where we were in early February, mid-February, because that's really, really important. So we will update this group as we go on that front, and we're certainly having lots of conversations with legislative leadership about those ideas, and we hope to be able to implement them as soon as practical.
Hey, David, can I have 30 seconds on the sole props?
Yes.
Okay.
Mark, please.
So I did find in the interim final rule it said, as it relates to documentation necessary to establish eligibility, it would be records, payroll, tax filings, Form 99 miscellaneous, or income expenses from a sole proprietorship. For borrowers that do not have such documentation, the borrower must provide other supporting documentation, such as bank records sufficient to demonstrate the qualifying payroll amount.
Great, Mark. Thanks so much. And listen, I want to, before I turn it back to the governor, thank everyone for dialing into this call and participating. Thank you, everyone, for speaking that spent the time to do it. And again, our hope is to do more of these in the future as the situation evolves. Governor Lamont?
Yeah, thank you, David. I was taking notes. That was very informative for me. But broad philosophy, the last question I heard was how many more executive orders, essential business, tightening, and we've done something like 18 executive orders. What I want you to know is what we're trying to do is just define how we can make the workplace safer, and essential is often how much big social interaction there has to be and how we can make sure we limit that amount of social action going forward. I hope we're winding that down. I heard the question about, hey, April 30th, do you think I can get my restaurant going again? I can tell you that we had the schools closed until April 20th, and I regret to say that we're going to announce within a day or so that they will stay closed for at least another month, May 20th. And I would assume that you can see the same thing in terms of bars and restaurants and some of our other businesses. I think the general theme is, all right, when can I get back to work? When can I get my business going again? And how do I get from here to there? I think with, we hear banking and insurance and market, SBA, and everything we're trying to do with the loan program to help you power through April, May, even June, so we can get closer to the back side of this thing. Everything we're trying to do at the state level, and I really believe they're doing it at the federal level, is do everything we can to keep their businesses intact. I don't know whether this is going to be a V-shaped recovery, as the president suggests, or whether public health concerns will make the second half of this V a little more gradual as it gets back and we carefully bring people back to work. I'm a little scared that if we go too fast and take too much risk, you're liable to have a second hit on this virus, which would just be tragic for everybody. But I think you hear, at least from the themes, we're thinking about the next day, what goes on around the bend, so to speak, and how we can start revving our engines up with the priorities in terms of testing, loans, and keeping your businesses intact. So thank you, everybody. This type of information is good for me, and I hope it's helpful for you.
Great. Thank you, Governor. With that, that concludes our call.